Welcome, everyone, to another edition of ALN Thursday at 3 p.m. ET. And we're having our first ALN Senior Fellows discussion today. Tacoma Zach, CEO of Mentor APM, and Mark Knight, President of Gators, have established a series of topics they're going to address, mainly around the idea that different types of organizations need different approaches to asset management, but everybody can benefit from asset management. I will let them explain it when we bring them in. But first, we'd like to thank our patron members, Jacobs, Mantech, Onuma, ABS Quality Evaluations, and CGI, and all of our organizational members. And we'd like to talk a little bit about what's coming up. Next week, we've got Chris Silkey, who's going to be talking about the first natural asset assessment in Portland, Oregon's parks and recreations. And this might be one of the first natural asset assessments in general among municipalities in the United States. It's going to be really interesting discussion. I'm looking forward to that. And then if you saw in our newsletter this week, the ALN is part of recommendations to the revised federal acquisition requirements, FAR. And we've got some experts who are going to be joining us about how to introduce ISO 55000 into the federal requirements in a way that hasn't happened in ages. Now, this is something that's in process and people can join in the discussion. People can join in the process of how we're going to be doing this and participating in our recommendations. It's really exciting about how people are bringing things to the Asset Leadership Network and helping us or requesting that we use our momentum and the gravitas of this nonprofit to forward so many different interesting activities. And we are very grateful for the support and participation. And with that, we're grateful for our ALN Senior Fellows, Tacoma Zach and Mark Knight, who came up with the idea for today's program. So Tacoma and Mark, you want to join us and start off by just doing a little blip about your organizations, maybe something that you're up to these days. Tacoma, you want to get started?
Sure. Thanks. So the organization that you see behind me is Mentor APM. So it is a SaaS software as a service solution for CMMS, asset performance management, capital investment planning, designed for utilities. And it really was designed from the basis of having operated utilities myself in the past. It is sort of the one-stop complete end-to-end solution that we believe the market needs, with asset management principles, ISO 55000 principles embedded in best practices and how do I just say it? The things that you need to do tactically and practically on a day-to-day basis that are all in support of that. So we are pretty interested in making sure people get value from their assets and that the principles and the intended outcome of ISO 55000 people are able to realize. And we believe that our software solution is really the only one that does that.
Excellent. And you've got an AI component that we've talked about to launch earlier this
Oh
year. Let's
yeah.
not get into that. I'm just pitching that for you. I don't want
Oh
to get you
man.
started on that. And we do want to engage with you on our ALN pilot project network, which is taking off very well. And we'll talk about that later, Tacoma. Mark, will you tell us a little bit about Gators Consulting?
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm basically a one-man enterprise. I've worked for I've done a number of different things. I've worked for a electric utility in the UK, electric utility in the US. I worked for a research lab in the UK. I worked for one of the Department of Energy national labs here in the US. I've done a lot of consulting, mostly electric utilities, but various areas. And decided to go out on my own and kind of pick and choose what I want to do and enjoy life a little bit. But
Excellent.
yeah, one of the things I do in my sort of spare time is TC 251. So I'm also part of the US Technical Advisory Group, as is Tacoma. So we sort of knew each other for a while, and then Jennifer was doing the webinar for you that I spoke at a few months ago, and Tacoma and I just got talking, and we've been having some regular chats ever since. And we talked a bit about what asset management is, what it means to different types of organizations, and Tacoma thought it would be good topic for a chat, but we didn't want to put together slides. And I know you are kind of in the camp of preferring, live talk without preparation. So I mean, we've talked, the two of us together, and now, well, me and you, Mike, and me and with Tacoma, that I think we were on the same page, and we thought we kind of knew where this might go, but it could go in an unintended direction and be a complete disaster. Who knows?
But before we get started, will you explain about the name of your company?
I'm a huge Florida Gators fan, so I was setting up my own company, and I had a name picked out, and it's just a case of procure the website and do all that. And one of my friends said to me, "Well, you already own that, Gators domain, because I've had that for 20 plus years for personal email. Why not just use that?" So that's what I did.
Excellent. Okay, so you were setting up about what you and Tacoma have been talking about. So I'll just sit back and let you guys continue your ad hoc discussion. This is what the network is supposed to be doing, is get people talking. So go ahead.
Hopefully, we'll have some takeaways for people. But I think we've got two competing topics here, because Tacoma and I were talking about the differences facing say a large industrial organization with resources at its disposal versus, say, a small municipality, and what asset management means to them and where they get started. But also, Tacoma's wife has been. I did a little video kind of promoting this, I guess, but she was talking a bit about risk, resilience, reliability, and redundancy, which I don't think was what we were going to talk about. So we'll have to weave that in a little bit as well.
We'll figure it out along the way. There was something interesting. I think if you'll recall, when we were on the last TC 251 call, there was a comment made that there's a big difference, between asset management and managing assets.
Mm-hmm.
And even committee members fall prey to, I don't want to use, say devolving, but sort of say falling from talking about asset management and beginning to talk about managing assets, or at least those components. And it's tricky to remain at one level, because there's always a practical component. There's always something we got to do with the stuff that exists. There's a reason why those assets exist in the first place. And it's easy to think about practical or tactical or tangible things to do, and sort of stray a little bit from the topic of asset management. And what I would like to do at the beginning, and this is actually, I think, when Tom was mentioning that comment in the last session we had, is let's define at this point, at least as we think it is, the difference between managing assets and asset management. And you know what, Mark, I'm going to let you go first. So, hey, it's an easy one, isn't it?
It should be an easy one, but I think I mean, if this were easy, we wouldn't be doing things like this. So, all right, I'll go first. Let's start with a promo or a plug first. So there is a TC2. If you Google TC251 managing assets, you'll probably find a 2 or 3 page document that was produced maybe 10, I don't know if it's 10 years ago, but it's a real solid document. And the thing is that I think when you talk about managing assets versus asset management, people can look at you like, are you a standards geek? Is this wordplay for the sake of it? And it's not, because asset management does have a much broader context. It has, it includes the policy, the strategy, stakeholders, external influences. Whereas managing assets is more focused on, your typical sort of work management, CMMS, things that most people will think of, I think, when they think of asset management. And and managing assets is an integral piece of asset management. It's just that asset management is broader. I mean, I like looking at. I'll give you a difference rather than definitions. So, I think at a managing assets focus, people focus on doing things right, absolutely nailing the process, being as good as they can be at it. I think the evolution of that is into actually doing the right things. And ultimately, when you get into full asset management, that comes from setting the right objectives. If you know what the organization's goals are, who its stakeholders are, what it is you want to be doing, that's going to drive doing the right things. And once you've figured out the right things, you can do them right, rather than just assuming that what you're doing is right. And putting a lot of time and effort into just being the best you can be at something that maybe not organizationally the best thing you should be doing.
Hmm. I think to work backwards a little bit, I think, managing assets, and I agree with you, is, doing the right things, figuring out what you got to do. It's really looking after those things, the assets that exist for a reason. But what are you going to do to those things? And I think this is where the asset management part comes. And having been fortunate enough to work on a couple of projects with Jim Dieter and having listened to, some other folks, but it's my impression, at least this is what I always tell our folks that we talk to, customers, et cetera. It's like, look, asset management is a coordinated approach between those different parts of your organization. That includes finance, that includes purchasing, to holistically take a look at something to get maximum value from your assets. And so when when you look at that and sort of break it apart a little bit, there's more than just like, oh, here's what I'm going to do to this asset. Because it includes like, well, which asset am I going to buy? Is this asset too expensive to own once I buy it because it takes too much to maintain? Or is this something that actually my cost of ownership is much lower? Is my life cycle cost overall, is it got a better life cycle calculus, associated with it? And is it bringing finance into it, bringing the different stakeholders into it? So it is that much more holistic view. And so when we explain to folks as saying, look, asset management is this thing you do, it's a system, it's a coordinated approach between the big parts of your organization, from finance to legal to purchasing and operations and whatever else you want to include in that, to making sure that you are getting max value from what you're doing. This is it's a much broader calculus than to say, well, I've got these things that I have to look after. What am I going to do to them? What's the smart thing to do to those things? You're going to have to look after them a particular way. And if you bought something that was cheap to buy and it cost you more to maintain, well, you're going to have to do that. So somebody made a decision at the asset management part and said, well, this is what we're going to buy. And maybe they didn't make the best decision because they ended up buying something that costs too much. So I think one is a much broader strategic corporate view of things, whereas, managing assets, that's right down to the shop floor. That's from corporate right on down to the shop floor. And I think in what we've always, really tried to do is make that connection to say, okay, look, what does the organization really care about? What do the stakeholders care about? What are the values the organization holds? And making sure that those divisions within that organization have had an input into that. It's always interesting watching when that happens, what they've got in the field, what ends up being important, and where their risk is, and the kind of decisions they're going to make afterwards. And it's always different than what they've done to date, because there's always
Examples
variance.
are helpful. Do either of you have specific examples?
Yes. So it depends, though, whether we're going to talk about strategic or tactical stuff. But I would say things always end up working their way out, sort of in reality, what they're going to do on a day-to-day basis. But when we've done an analysis for what folks should look at, and I won't name names, but I will say that in one particular case, there was a situation where, oh wow, a whole bunch of things that they thought were important but based on their metrics, the stakeholder engagements and what they thought was the values of the organization and the charter of why those assets existed. When that was evaluated, they realized, oh, we're spending a lot of money on stuff that actually isn't important. In every single case, customers have been able to identify, wow, we're spending a whole bunch of time on XYZ, and we don't need to do that on XYZ because it turns out it wasn't important. That's not where we're at risk. If we look at where we are at risk, and I remember Reese Davies said this years ago, and he goes, look, ultimately you're wanting to be making risk-based decisions on these things. You know, where is your charter at risk? And I don't mean legally. I mean, like, you know, if you're supposed to do XYZ, when is XYZ at risk of not being able to be performed? And making those financial decisions about where are we going to spend money in order to secure what we're supposed to be all about. So those really are risk-based decisions, whether it's financial or physical risk, et cetera. And so when we've done that, we've always found that customers have said, oh, maybe 30 to 50% of the stuff they thought was important wasn't. And the other
Mark,
part is
do you
they
have
were
an
able
example?
to. Well, other than naming names, yes, I'll
No,
say
no,
that.
I asked Mark.
Oh,
You
sorry.
had provided an example.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Mark, do you have an
okay.
example?
Yeah, no, before I do that, I want to go back to something that Tacoma said, because he used, he said, what is asset management? And he talked about coordinated. It, when ISO 55001 first came out, I liked using the PAS 55 definition of asset management because it was like half a paragraph length long definition of what it was. And you could break that into half a dozen phrases and explain to people what that meant. But over time, I just become, I've fallen fully in love with the ISO 55000 definition of, coordinated activities to realize value from assets. And coordination is the key to doing that, right? It's getting rid, if you can get rid of process silos and data silos, that is the key to making improvements just as much as getting better at any of those individual things. So I'll give you a kind of example, but like Tacoma said, it's a bit like with benchmarking, right? If somebody is an outlier in a benchmarking study and you're talking about it, everybody knows who they are. So how do you talk about examples without saying who it is? But this was a how do we implement asset management more formally project. The organization did have top level support, and they had a program office that owned the capital investment planning part of what the company did. And the director of that unit actually offered to transfer one of the departments over to the asset management folks. So, I mean, there's a couple of problems. One, there's an asset management department because everybody thinks those are the people that do asset management rather than it's something that everybody does. And then the other thing is, what I said to him was, if you look at the now 40 subjects that make up asset management, from the Global Forum on Maintenance and Asset Management, if you're going to take the capital planning people and move them into their department, you're not going to own asset management until you've got all 40 of those areas reporting to you, and then you're going to be the CEO. So it's not about building empires within the companies to get better at doing things. I said, leave the capital planning people where they are, integrate them into what you do. Again, it's the coordination. And they did.
Okay, so that example brings up the idea that you had stated earlier about the difference between asset management at a smaller municipality and a large organization. So can both of you address that?
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, what? Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, sure. And I'll actually come back with something a little more tangible from the example I was alluding to before, and that is was a very large municipal organization, municipal facility, Midwest, and even back of the envelope calculations came up with 20% savings on their maintenance spend just by focusing and targeting where they were at risk. And so I mean that is a people often ask, well, is asset management worth it? We're like, well, there's a clear example that it is worth it. Another clear example is the organization I used to work for, Veolia. And in the West, we did things according to those. Well, at the time it was PAS 55, but similar principles involved. And we found 20% savings on our maintenance spend, often similarly so on ops spend, and way more stable operations, fewer NOVs, notices of violations. You know, we're talking about water, wastewater plants, that kind of stuff, which are essential public infrastructure type of assets. And that is something that you can actually literally take to the bank. But the point is that that's a fiscally responsible way of managing public infrastructure is they saying, oh, we are getting better value from our assets. And it's tangible in that because we did these things, we ended up saving a lot of money. So, you know, when you look at a municipality, for instance, their business model is a little bit different than an industrial business model, and it a little bit depends on the industry, et cetera. But I'll talk about the municipal one, and then we can sort of back and forth it a little bit, Mark. But the municipal business model, the way we've always viewed it is, because I've worked in both, is um, let's say take a water plant. That business model is always make clean water, never don't make clean water. And a sewage plant or wastewater plant, water reuse plant, however we want to call it, is always take wastewater, never don't take wastewater. It's binary. It's like this, you do this, and you just don't not do this. And there is very little gray, if anything. What that has resulted in is an excess of assets, extra capacity because, oh, a pump goes down. Well, we have another pump. We have 5 pumps when actually we really need 3, can never do with less than 3, but we'll put 5 in because there's public money and we just sort of say, hey, things are going to go wrong, but we can never not pump. So we have to have excess capacity. Very different, you know, than a business model, industrial business model. So on the industrial or on the municipal side, there's excess capacity. Resiliency is built in a different way, and I know we talked about it. We'll bring that in because it actually does make a difference. Um, and the stakeholders is the public in a different way than industry is, although it depends if it's a food product. In the municipal context, it's very personal because there you're making something that we consume literally multiple times a day. We drink, we cook with it, we drink it, you know, and then it's very personal that it affects us, our health. So we have to be very careful with it. We have to do the right thing with it. Contrasting that with industrial, and I'll pass it over to you, Mark, if you want to jump in on that.
Well, I think, well, I know we talked about, I mean, the genesis for this was discussions you and I were having anyway, and we talked about, you know, municipalities can struggle with, you know, fragmented data and also having multiple stakeholders and being closer to their stakeholders. But whereas industrial sites already typically will have SCADA, you know, CMMS, but lacking in a risk-weighted framework. And I think that was one of the points we discussed. Whereas, I mean, I found with some large commercial and industrial organizations, not that they lack a risk-weighted framework, but they have multiple of them. And at that point, you know, you've got different ways to assess risk, different ways to put value on things, and then it becomes very difficult to make decisions. I've seen a mixed electric and gas utility implementing asset management on the electric side. And while there's some impetus to actually develop a program, you know, one of the questions I asked them was, where is there more value ultimately to your customers and your shareholders, and to reliability? Is it, you know, like, should you replace the gas regulators or the electric circuit breakers? If you only have asset management in one place, or you've got 2 asset management silos, you've never got an answer. You may have multiple answers that aren't the same. So, you know, we need that top-down approach. Once we get into resilience, I'm going to go way down too
Yeah,
many.
I think the as a point of contrast, at least what we found when we were dealing with the oil industry, and I did say one of the exceptions may be, you know, food, because food is very personal as well. But the idea though is that where there's an excess of assets because it's a little bit more binary, is like we can never not make something. We always have to make something, and it has to be, you know, potable. Industry is a little bit different. industry is, well, we have to make the most amount of money with the least amount of spend. And so they don't have 5 pumps when they need 3, they have 3 pumps. And those pumps better not go down. So they tend to spend more money on monitoring what's going on. This is the tactical component of things, how they're going to extract value out of their assets. So they monitor them like crazy, and they'll intervene earlier on. But they have a much higher asset count where the assets are more critical because they have fewer assets that are redundant. More assets are important because they'll upset the apple cart, and they don't want to spend any money on any kind of excess. So their business model is predicated on profitability, not on safety or a minimum standard that never makes anybody sick. So in that sense, the values that go into the equation are a little bit different. Now, the regulatory climate also makes a difference because this is one of the things I've always thought was a little bit unfair, and the municipal operations are not going to like what I'm about to say. But I always thought it was a little bit unfair that, industrial is subject to OSHA, but municipal is not. And both are potentially hazardous environments. But I bring this up because one of the values of the organization, as you make an assessment from the top down, from asset management, is say, hey, I care about safety. I want the people who come to work every day to go home the same way, safe and sound, with all fingers intact, etc. And so when there is something in the facility, industrial or municipal, where safety is an issue, you need to pay attention to it. It has to be pretty important. Well, there's an additional driver on the industrial side. Well, it's OSHA. Gosh, if there's a guardrail missing, it's going to get flagged. So you've got this regulatory burden. And having worked in refineries in the state of California, it's an extremely, how should I say, strong lever, the regulatory environment, because they can really cause you some serious financial damage. So I think the business model is a little bit different between municipalities and industrial, in that the industrial will be making value decisions more on profitability and return on investment than municipalities will, because technically speaking, it's not a big lever, because their biggest lever is always make something people can consume. So, I think that's one of the changes, or one of the differences between the models. I don't know, Mark. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, the short-term, long-term thing I mean,
Mm-hmm.
one of the reasons I think asset management programs can struggle to get traction is, you convince people to take a long-term approach, put a policy together, do all the things you're talking about, Tacoma, and then something hits the fan somewhere, and all of a sudden you're into firefighting and making things look good short-term, and balancing those short-term emergencies against long-term benefits can be difficult. I mean, I know. Oh, I mean, I was just looking at the clock as we were running out of time. But I mean, I know we
We
talked
can,
about a whole.
we
I
can
mean,
go over. Let me just say, this is too interesting for me to stop at the bottom of the hour. If anybody needs to go, we understand, but as long as you guys can continue sharing your thoughts, we're interested.
well, I want to. 4 things I want to say super quick. One, I mean, I know we did talk about some possible takeaways. And Tacoma and I have often talked about criticality in our discussion. So one is assign a criticality to each asset, because that gives you, if you know what assets you've got and how critical each one is, you've got the foundation for making portfolio based decisions across the board. The other is, going back to the asset leadership paper that we worked on with you, Mike. Find your asset management champions in your organization that can help you move the program forward. And then if you're going to put a formal program in place, limit the focus, aim to create repeatable processes and grow from that. Create something that people will actually refer to and believe in. And you were asking about other examples of asset management success that you can point to. And the one I always look at is the city of Washington, D.C. Richard Dietz has presented on this multiple times. They had a lot of high priority things they wanted to do, and they didn't have cash to do it. So they started a very structured approach to looking at the condition priorities, what they needed to do. And Moody's saw what they were doing, and their bond rating went up, and they got more borrowing power. I mean, that is a really solid example of why asset management can make a difference long term.
Yeah, there's and I like what you said, particularly about the bond stuff. So one of the challenges that we looked at is for the very same set of drivers, you've got to be able to do more with less. And the way we always sort of term it is like if you got $10 to spend, but you got $100 of need, where are you going to put it? And you have to be able to prioritize, you have to be able to scale it, and you have to have the analysis done in such a way that it's actually meaningful and is legit. There's no point in doing an analysis, that is going to give you, crazy results, and then you make financial decisions on that. So that was always, our charter as well, is to make sure to make sure that when we did analyses that we would spend our own money on that, and we did. And so we knew that the way we were analyzing things was as such that we were getting this kind of return on investment. But I think one of the additional challenges, Mark, that you had mentioned is this time horizon. So again, stories from the past. So when you look at, let's say, a power plant, and a power plant technically, yes, it's kind of, it's a critical infrastructure, of course, because we all need electricity, but it's not as personal as, let's say, a water plant is. And what we looked at the business models, and we say, that infrastructure for water or wastewater, storm sewers, roads, is not going away. It's not changing ownership. It's not like all of a sudden somebody else might come and run it for you, maybe if you need outside help to run it, but it stays with that community. And so you're looking at 50, 100 years, right? Whereas when you look at a power plant, the ownership can change in 5 years. And we've seen it before too, is like somebody comes in, they fix a few things up, they run the guts out of it like crazy, and then try and sell it 5 years later to some chump who's going to buy it and hopefully, is going to have to fix up a bunch of other stuff. So asset management really doesn't seem to figure that in the case examples that I was made aware of, didn't figure very prominently at all. In fact, it was kind of dismissed as like, fix it up enough, get 5 years out of it, and then we're done with it. You can't do that with municipal assets. Now, if you're talking about industries that have a brand recognition, where the facility, like Coca-Cola, or I don't know if we're allowed to mention any names, but call them world-class, common household name brands. You really can't, do that kind of stuff. You might be able to do it with the building and shift building, but your equipment's going to change or move with you, or you might upgrade. But the point is if you're making something that's a food product, you have to be profit oriented mindset, of course, but that additional factor in there's like, well, how long am I going to have these assets? Now, the assets might have a life cycle, 10 years, but overall, that integrated approach from all the different parts of that facility isn't just going to be 10 years. It's going to be 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. So sometimes it isn't just like the analogy is like, okay, while the wastewater assets stick around for 100 years with a community, sometimes a brand, an industry, has a name that kicks around for 50 years, and the brand is important as well, particularly if they tend to care about the people that they serve. So again, these are factors I think that go into it. And whereas some industries can basically dump their assets because they're anonymous, because it's a power company. It's like we do, they deal with load leveling and come on only when the rates are high enough, that sort of stuff. Versus something that says, no, we will produce vehicles, or we'll produce food or cereal in the mornings, whatever for breakfast, and they have to kick around for a long time. Now, assets might, float around a little bit or in and out, but that value from their assets has to be maintained over a long period of time again. So I think this is again one of the challenges between municipal operations, where assets don't leave anywhere, and other ones where it's industrial, where they're around for a while, and other ones in industrial where it's anonymous and they can just basically run and dump, or dump and run, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, certainly on the power generators, those are almost a commodity market. They're bought and sold and traded amongst
Yeah.
holding companies. There's a, I mean, there is an example I can't actually give, but let's hint at it. The Washington D.C. example. There is the other side of the coin to that example for a municipality that had, they went in the other direction. But I won't go into the details. But having structured and repeatable processes that are aligned with what your organization is meant to be doing can hurt you if you don't have it. It can help you if you do. And to your point about differing timescales, I mean, even the electricity industry. I mean, a lot of those assets are 40 to 70 years old. but now we're putting intelligent sensors on them to monitor them, and those sensors may have like 7 to 10 to 15-year lifespans, but now they're assets themselves that have to be monitored. So you've got multiple overlapping timescales, basically looking at the same assets, and you've got to figure out where the value is there. And I saw somebody, they were actually looking at putting in thermal imaging all over an electrical substation. And it's a whole new group of assets you've got to manage. You've got the communications to manage to that, to secure. You've got the data associated with all of that. And at the end of the day, the types of things you're monitoring that have a heat signature are not the types of things that suddenly fail. They generally take months to fail. And anything that causes them to catastrophically fail is probably something that you're never going to see on a heat camera anyway. So, it's like, why spend a lot of money getting new toys that you really want to spend money on and have fun playing with when it's going to add nothing to organizational value? You can spend that money on something more effective.
You reminded me of something, and that is purchasing departments like to buy boxes, gizmos, things like that. And it's one of these things that there's sort of two peeves that I've come across. And it's not necessarily the purchasing department's fault, because the regulations a lot of times, and so this is why the regulators are sort of equally to blame about this, if not more so. And that is lowest bid wins is not the way to take a look at these things. What we tell every one of our customers is like, and we talk to the purchasing department specifically, it's like, look, you've got to take your future budgets into account. And I know we sometimes have a very short horizon about next year, but we need to look at the life cycle cost of what these assets cost us, which means you don't buy the lowest bid, which a lot of times seems to be the way it's set up for municipalities. If we look at that, so it's like lowest bid wins, and therefore you buy something and nobody thinks about how hard it is to maintain, or can you get spare parts easily, and that kind of stuff. Or what's my burden afterwards? Can I even measure and monitor this thing properly so that it doesn't go down or whatever? So that's one thing, and the sort of the flip side of that is the regulators as well. Putting things in place to align things like ISO 55000 into the purchasing policies or the accessing money policies. What I am liking of late is that, if you want part of the state revolving fund, you want to come to the trough, yeah, you should have an asset management plan in place. And so that's a good thing. What the standard is of what they're saying the plan has to contain, or how effective it is, or that sort of thing, well, we still probably have some work to do in that regard. But I think this all goes back down to, at least it does for me, about the notion of integrity and the notion of fiscal responsibility. When it comes to the public infrastructure and public money, it's public money that we're spending and making decisions on behalf of the public. And I hope that we leverage enough of the tools that are available to us to make decisions in such a way that the public will be benefited, not just this year, but over the next 10, 15, 20 years, that the decisions are made more holistically and more comprehensively rather than short-term thinking. And because industry has the luxury of doing the short-term thinking, I don't think the municipalities quite have the same luxury. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah, one of the things I do when I talk to large groups of people, individually as part of a project, when you get into the end of a conversation and people have opened up, they're comfortable talking. One of my favorite questions is, if you had a magic wand and you could make one thing come true, or you were king or queen for a day, what's your one thing you would fix? I think you just nailed it for me, because we've all seen plenty of stats and things flying around that roughly 80% of the life cycle cost of an asset are sunk or set, when you purchase it, based on how reliable it's going to be, its maintenance requirements, and all that. And yet the lower long-term life cycle cost probably often has a higher initial cost. So that's just that would be probably a good topic just on its own.
And not necessarily to elevate one brand over another, but we're all fairly, it's no secret that when you look at Consumer Reports and you look at, Kelly Blue Book and all that other kind of stuff, why is it that a particular, well, probably two branded Japanese cars, one starts with T and the other one starts with H, they might have both 100,000 miles on it, but you're paying a pretty good penny. And for about half the price of this comparable vehicle that is American made, you can buy the American made used car for about half the price. And the cost to get into the T or the H doesn't cost that much, more, if anything, but they build them reliably. And what we often do is we tell folks, look, you guys actually know how to do asset management very, very well in your personal lives. You make risk-based decisions all the time. If you have vehicles, how are you maintaining them? If your kids start driving them, all of a sudden you become really sharp on like, oh, wait a second, how are my tires like? And what are the things that are going to fail? And should I buy that car or should I buy a better car that's not going to cost me so much on maintenance? And yes, you're going to get a Toyota, and yes, you're going to get a Honda, or whatever it ends up being, because the reliability is there. Now, reliability is a completely different thing, but the point is that when we take risk into account, we take our loved ones into account, we take cost of maintenance, can they get to places reliably? Or if you do it on a personal level, you've got one vehicle for family, it has to work. So which one are you going to pick? If you have 4 vehicles in the driveway, well, then each one, maybe not as important that much, because one doesn't work today, I'll drive in the other one tomorrow. The point is you make these risk-based decisions all the time. And we just have to bring that framework to work and think, oh, okay, it's, if it works at home in microeconomics, it's probably going to work in macroeconomics. And I guarantee it absolutely does. The assets just happen to be bigger and more of them.
But I mean, so the other side of that is, so you have a car, maybe you have young drivers in the house. You anticipate that it's going to be involved in a lot more minor accidents. So maybe you don't do the T or the H approach. You go for something that you can buy spares at half the cost because you're going to keep replacing the same piece. So the spares are more readily accessible and they're cheaper, and but it's
That's risk-based decision making,
yeah.
and there you go. So that's
Yeah.
what.
And you're taking life cycle
decision-making
into
is.
account. You're taking a sort of a holistic account because you're taking finances into account. You're taking safety into account. You're taking operating costs into account because you got to buy gas, right? And insurance, that's involved in there as well. So when you look at all those factors, those are the stakeholder
Yeah.
factors. Then there is the other factor though, is like, Dad, the car's not cool enough. I want something different, right?
All right, but
Oh,
let's get into
we went down that
resilience.
road.
Let's get into resilience first. Mark threatened a few points on resilience.
Oh, well, so I don't know if anybody saw Jen's video where she was pouring liquid into a metal coffee mug and a glass one, and they're both reliable, and then she hits them both with a hammer, and surprised the glass one shattered. So 2 points here. I worked with an organization that had become incredibly reliable, and their concern was that it could be a problem for resilience because when nothing goes wrong, all the people have to fall back on when things do go wrong is training that they may have forgotten, right? So, we replay that video like 10 times, and on the 10th time, a crack appears or a fracture appears in the metal coffee mug. Like, yeah, you've replaced the glass one 10 times. You know where the supply of those are and where to buy new ones. The metal one we never expected to fail. We don't even know if we've got another one. What the heck do we do? We're running around in circles because we don't know how to fix that. And I've also seen, ideally back to the managing assets, asset management, you get your planned maintenance work, most of the jobs are in that. The emergency and stuff is a small percentage, but I've seen organizations that have that percentage wrong, and yet they are confident they can fix anything quickly because all they do is fight fires. They are used to responding quickly and tackling anything. And Tacoma and I did talk about this the other week, and somewhere in there is a balance where reliability and resilience you know, where there's an optimum, and it's going to be very different for every organization.
Yeah, and I think the in as much as I think if you did a Monte Carlo simulation on the video, eventually the steel mug would break. But I think looking at both industrial and municipal operations, we found that, and I think the conversation for asset management is much better served with resilience than it is with reliability. And the reason is the following. Um, I think sometimes reliability or resilience, I should say, can either happen by a modest redesign, a cross connection, adding a particular valve, staging something else. The point is here's resilience explained from the vehicle perspective. If I've got one vehicle and two people have to go to work, oh, that car is very, very, very important, and its reliability is important, but my ability to transport is not that resilient because I've only got one car. I don't have any backups. But if I've either got three cars in the driveway, or I've got a standing order with Hertz Rental, or I've got my neighbor who lets me use this, or I got a motorcycle, whatever, then reliability is still important because I don't want to have to use the other ones. But my ability to get transported is much more resilient because I have other options available. I either have more cars, or I've got cross connections, or I've got, there are technical ways to build resiliency. And as we've got changes in environmental factors, we've got changes in population, we've got degrading assets in certain locations, the notion of resilience is an increasingly important discussion because the way we kind of describe it is like, how hard can your assets take a hit and still keep on doing what they're supposed to do? Now, the individual asset might not be able to take the hit, so you've got redundancy. Or something happens one place, we cross connect, we use something else until we get something fixed. The point is that we have to maintain service, level of service. And resiliency gives us options that reliability doesn't. If I have a particular asset and it only has a maximum type of reliability, I can't make it more reliable than the manufacturer intended it to be, and whatever design it is and whatever purchasing decided to buy for me. But if I'm able to go ahead and say, well, I can create some other options for myself because I can stage something, I can cross connect something. I've got a system over there that I'm going to drop, put a pipe in here with a couple of valves. And if this one goes down, I can use that one over there. Because what I'm looking after now is I'm looking after service. I'm looking after the service that I'm supposed to provide. And service is better served with resiliency overall because I have more options than I am just about reliability. If I want more reliability, I either need to improve my staff or I have to change the asset out. Those are the two primary things. Maybe there's a third one. And when I say improve the staff, I mean improve what we're doing to the asset to capture it sooner, capture the failure sooner. But if I look at resiliency, then I was like, okay, I'm probably going to do that too, but I'm going to get myself a couple of backup plans. And I think with asset management, when we're looking for maximum value from our assets, I think resiliency serves us, or optimal value, whatever you want to call it. I think resiliency serves us better, particularly when there's stakeholders involved. And I know from an industrial perspective, if something goes down, you better have plan B and plan C in place to make sure that you can keep running or somebody loses their job.
Yeah, I mean, resilience is something I'm particularly fond of. I was doing research for one of the national labs on resilience a couple of jobs ago. But when you look at an event, there's what happens before the event hits, there's what happens during the event, and then there's the recovery period after it. There's three, well, at a minimum, I would say three distinct phases, that need to be looked at for resilience. But in that, between the before and the during, where those two meet, there's a short window at the end of the before and at the beginning of the during, where you can make a big difference, and mitigate some of the effects of whatever it is, whether we're talking about nanoseconds or days or hours of an event. But the key factor, if you look at a lot of different definitions of resilience, one of the words that crops up in probably 80% of them is adaptability. And the ability to adapt during that crunch point is a key factor, I would argue, in resilience. And it's not just resilience of the assets. It's the resilience of the people, the personal psychology. If I don't see this as a threat to myself, I'm going to take it less seriously. And if your people aren't working properly, the organization's not going to function properly as well. So there's many, there's the technical, there's the personal layers of resilience, and it's a fascinating topic.
There was an interesting case on that part that merges both the mechanical and the human factors. So early in my career, working up in Canada, we used to run the wastewater treatment systems for General Motors, and once a month, they made us shut down all the computers. Everything had to be run manually. Every valve had to be opened manually, and there was a long gantry, like a galleyway, we had to run down, and there was a time limit. When one valve got opened, you had to make it down to the other end in a particular amount of time to open something else up. And so, but GM wanted us to do that because they said, you can't count on electricity all the time. Suppose something happens. We want you guys to make sure you know. And to keep us, um, call it resilient, is that we had to practice once a month. We couldn't lose that factor. And I remember as a young engineer, I thought, wow, this is really cool. It's a lot more work, but it's really, really cool because they wanted to make sure that the plant was never going to go down in as much as they could control or foresee, which was a really good way of doing business.
And
And
this
I
is
can't
a
remember if we
good point
discussed this off.
to wind up. Is what you were saying going to wind up, Mark?
Yeah, just very quick one, but a company I did some work for a long, long time ago put in a lot of automated processes to replace manual ones, but the need for people to go and interact with those systems was very low because of high reliability. So it kind of goes back to my previous point, but what they found was happening was when they had a problem and engineers had to go and work with these systems, the first thing they would do is pull the plug out to the screen and say the automated system is malfunctioning. We're going to revert to manual controls. Because you're not used to using them, you don't have the confidence, you don't know what to do. I love that example of forcing backup procedures into place on a regular basis so people actually know how to do that.
Yeah. So we managed to touch a little bit on resilience and, and reliability, and I at least I think, at least from my take in the context of managing assets for sure, and in the context of asset management as a whole. But at least it's my perception and my opinion as we've done risk-based analyses for folks, and I love the fact that they at least when we encourage them to to follow our procedures, is that they're in line with ISO 55,000 stakeholders, values, that sort of thing, the charter for why the assets even exist. And the notion of them being able to then say, look, there are things you guys can do to make your facility much more resilient right now. What you actually end up doing as well is you derate the criticality of certain assets. If you can put a backup plan in place, then you've derated the assets in terms of their individual potential criticality. What you have not done, and you can't, is you cannot derate the criticality of the service those assets are supposed to provide. So if you're supposed to chlorinate, well, you can chlorinate 15 different ways, but you have to chlorinate. Chlorination is important. Let's just put it that way. Let's say in water plants. And you have to do that. You can't derate that one. But how you do it, you can say, oh, I've only got one way to do it, or I've got four ways to do it, right? So 5, 4, there we go. So it's an important distinction, and I think it makes facilities overall more resilient, and I think they end up getting better value because what they then are able to do is an inexpensive opportunity to stage or to adjust something, prevents them from having to spend boatloads of money on something that isn't required to spend boatloads of money on if we're getting a new one, because sometimes a cheaper alternative is I think often the better way to extract value from your assets. So
Well, the
anyways,
other nice thing
with
with
that I
resilience
yield.
is it forces you to focus on the vulnerability that's being exposed and how
Yeah,
that will affect you. I mean, risk management is, there's a lot of identifying what the threats are, but you could have multiple threats expose the same vulnerability. By
yeah,
understanding what that vulnerability is and addressing that and having plans for it,
yeah,
it puts you in a very strong position.
yeah. So
Well, excellent. I think you did do a good job of touching on risk, reliability, and resilience. I learned a lot, so thank you very much. And I've been listening to people talk about this for a few years now, and I learned something. And then you also touched on ways that different organizations have to face these things.
Yeah.
And the considerations are very similar, but they are facing different elements. So it changes some of the factors. So, and you kept everyone engaged, everyone stayed the whole time. So thank you to the audience. Thank you very much. Let me call this up again. Oh, and while I'm doing this, I want to thank Jennifer Zach, who did create the first premier preview of a program. And Mark, thank you so much for bringing it into the equation, the glasses that were demonstrated. And Tacoma's comment was, "Hey, I like that glass that you broke anyway." So,
yeah,
thank
that was
you.
actually one of my favorite mugs that I didn't realize we still had because it was stuck in the back of a cupboard.
But it made for a great video.
Yeah.
So you can still see that on LinkedIn. So thank you, Tacoma and Mark, for bringing your personal discussions forward to the group. And this is what this program is all about. And you really returned us to the roots.
Hey, listen, I have one last thing, and I know it sounds like shilling and that sort of stuff, but if anybody has interest, please look at Mentor Lens. And the reason is that in part, we really built this for the places that have nothing, like they don't even have, barely have Excel, to build an asset register, asset condition on the fly, so you can get to the table for state revolving funds.
Yes, and Tacoma, we want to have that be part of the ALN Pilot Project Network. So
Yeah.
let's talk about that. But really, thank you guys for this really engaging conversation, and thank you to our ALN patron members, Jacobs, Mantech, Onuma, ABS Quality Evaluations, and CGI, and all of our organizational members. We learned so much from our people, and we really appreciate them. It's really good people are attracted to this, and it's what Jim Dieter set up. So thank you all. And then next week, we've got Portland, Oregon, talking about natural asset assessment. And that's really interesting. And then the federal acquisitions regulation, which I had requirements at the start of the show, but I corrected that to regulation. And wouldn't it be great to have ISO 55000 as a requirement in that? So thanks everyone, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.
See you guys. Thank you.